Hello everybody and welcome to Boondoak's Cavern. Today we are going to be painting up a beholder figurine that I've been hunting for a while. I've only really been able to find the variants and the death tyrants and unfortunately the zombies in the store, so I had to order this little guy offline. What kind of surprised me when he got here, which I was super ecstatic about, was he has interchangeable eye stalks. So they come with these little bits. They have a visor he can put over your main eye, and then all your lasers and things like that every player dreads whenever they're playing. And so there's 4 of them that you can swap out with the main beholder. And I may or may not have stuck with the actual regular colors that you would be expecting for some of those features that the beholders have, but I painted them the way I liked them, and that's what you guys should do too. So grab your own paints and your own figures, and we'll get started. So here, I just want to show you a little example. This is the variant I did. All of my figures are painted by hand. I don't have an airbrush or anything like that. I'm still a bit of an amateur. So this guy was hand painted, and we ended up using a gloss coating that I have that isn't necessarily a traditional gloss that most folks use, and he was shaded using a wash, and we'll do the same kind of technique for this guy. So we're going to start out, we're going to get some masking tape, and obviously I'm regretting putting the gloves on first to pull the tape off, and we're going to cover up those clear portions that we have on those additional eye stalks. Now, you don't have to do this, but I was born with what you could call bear paws, and it just makes it easier. Now, I'm not going to go with any of the modern paint plans for this beholder. I am personally an absolute sucker for the awful looking purple orange plated beholder that you see with the classic figurines. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for my very first one. So always give your paints a thorough shake. I'm using some older paints here. I've had these, I'd say for at least 3 or 4 years. Actually, no, let me think about maybe 5 years. But of course, I don't like to waste, so I'm going to try and use these up as long as they last until I get some new ones. So what we're going to do not a strict wash, but I'd say a heavy wash or layering of that basic purple coat. And I do something that I know a lot of people are going to hate. I mix my paints. I don't use just the plain bottled color. I will always add a bit of a combo. I think it adds more of a personal feel to it. But the only issue is make sure you mix enough to start. So yeah, you're gonna waste some paint, but also you gotta finish it. If you let it sit and that paint dries and you gotta have to remix it, I mean, sometimes it's easy if you only have two different colors like I do here. Sometimes when you're working with 5 or 6, or you have another mixed color that you're adding into a standard, it's gonna be a lot harder to replicate. So just think about that in advance. It's all up to you guys. Now, as you can see with this portion, we're not getting a ton on the peaks of those shells, or I don't know, plates, whatever you would really call those, and that is just fine. The reason being, that's going to be our orange portion. So, you can see we've got that big base coat of purple going all around our figurine, and while I was doing this, I realized the eye isn't even a solid orb. You'll see when I turn it back around, it's chiseled out, and I'm not really sure how I feel about that. Even with the end product, I feel like I'd rather have a full solid eye versus something set in, but that's just me. So the next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be mixing up that top orange coat. Now, my initial one, I know it's going to end up a bit see-through because instead of going for a vibrant pink base like a magenta that would make that orange pop, we ended up going with a purple, so it's going to make it look a little bit brown after the first coat, and I think that is just fine. So these are the 3 that I'm starting with. Again, we're going to give them a good shake, and we're going to mix them, and then we're just going to go single plate by single plate, putting that orange on. And since this is my first video, I do apologize. My hands go in front of the camera a ton. I am right-handed, so I'm either A, having to remember to empty the bottle with my left hand so you guys can see what I'm doing, or B, I'm going to need to set up my camera orientation if I do anything in the future. And, you know, for working with recording on my phone at the dining room table, I think it ended up okay. So again, we're going with a 3-color mix for that top. Once I was looking at the original pictures after I did my paint, I realized that it's a bit more yellow in the traditional. If you hear any squeaking in the background, you can say hello to Mr. Clem Fandango. He of course, has to be involved in anything. You can't have the door closed. He's one of those cats. Anyway, so we're mixing up these paints here. And so the original base coat, I end up getting an orangish brown, and then I will do a little bit later to kind of add a bit more vibrancy, but you'll see that then. Now what you see that I'm doing there, I'm kind of testing the color against the purple that's already there. So I'm seeing if I'm okay with it, if I want to edit it a little bit before I start going in and actually putting the full coat on. I mean, of course, you can put 1 or 2 on, decide if you like it or if you don't, and then go from there, but I like to do a side-by-side comparison. It just helps me. Like I said before, we're going to start with these bigger ones on the side just because it helps a little bit. We're going to go plate by plate. And you will see my purple here is still a little damp. It's not completely dry, and I think that's okay. It gives you a little bit more blending for that bottom, that primary coat, because, I mean, if you're thinking about the actual versatility or the factor of the skin, that orange is going to be growing out of the purple. So if there's a little bit of that blending and translucency there, that is just fine. So we're going to go around this whole beholder, getting all these on, make sure they're on top and underneath. And of course, you know, the main challenge as somebody that's painting minis, how do I fit the brush there? You're just going to have to figure it out, just like every other one. This is the part where I started to feel like I really wish I had an airbrush, or maybe I would have tried dry brushing it to see if maybe I could get just the raised pieces, you know, versus going tile by tile. But it's worth it in the end. All right, so we've got all of our orange finished up. The eye stalks, I had to look back and double check on the original figure and imagery. They are completely orange, which I don't like that much, since in my mind the orange is the plating and the purple is the flexible fleshy bit underneath. So I tried to let a bit of the purple peek out to kind of give that illusion that, you know, those still are plated. Now, I forgot to hit record, so I mixed the mixing here, but I've got a bit of a pink with a little bit of maroon red in there that we mixed up, and the rock red kind of adds just a little bit of that highlight, that glossiness, and I used the ghost white that creates the pink there, because I don't have a strict pink paint. So we patched all those together, and we're just going through and we're doing the gums over the teeth, and then we're also going to be using that to fill in the hollow of the mouth. Now, with things like the teeth or the edges of the eye stalks, I am one of those that perpetually runs into the problem. I overpaint the gums, and then you do the teeth, and you overpaint the teeth, you have to go back in and redo the gums, and it's just a back and forth, and eventually you're just going to have to surrender to one or the other. In the final product, you'll see I did have a bit of overshot from that pink and red that did bleed onto the teeth at the end. But I mean, I think that's just fine because it has this giant hellish mouth or something, right? Obviously, he's not sitting in there brushing his teeth every day. So there's got to be a reason that's on there. And again, that perpetual problem. How do we make the brush fit between all of this? Now, sometimes, especially with the top of the mouth, I might not worry about it because the players are never going to see the top portion. Now, for myself, yes, it's always going to relay in the back of my mind that it was a complete, paint job and there's a patch in there. And yeah, it's going to bother you. One thing you can do if you can't figure out how to get a brush there, you can always do essentially a watered down, almost a wash, and put it in there and like tip it upside down if it's something like the top of the mouth. But again, you can't really control that, and that might take a long time to dry once you write it upright and it sits back on the bottom in puddles. But that's just what you have to decide to do if you would want to. Next, we are going to be painting our happy little eyeballs on these buggers. Now, I will almost always overpaint if it's white. Do I like doing white eyeballs? Absolutely not. I think they look dumb. But if I'm going for accuracy on that original figure, they had basic white eyes with a pinkish red iris and a black pupil. I mean, very straightforward. They don't have any of that fluorescent green or yellow eyes like you'll see on a lot of the newer ones, such as how I did them on my variant. So we're gonna go, and like I said, I'm gonna overshoot that white because I'm gonna come back in again because, as I said before, I need to get a new phrase. I'm gonna come back with a yellowish orange to try and make it pop a little bit more, and we can go around that white and make sure it is exactly in line with where the delineation is on the figure. I will say one of the hardest things when it comes to painting beholders is getting that angle right. there there's always one that's not going to face the same way as all the others, and then you go and you grab them, and then you pick up the paint that you just put down, and it's a long cycle. It gets a little tedious, but they always look pretty gnarly in a good way. Now, what I was pointing out here, we're going to do the same thing for the eye, the big eye. We're going to get that white on there. Now, because it's already primed with that gray, like every figure is, and the iris we're doing a red and the pupil we're doing a black, I am not going to worry about painting those white. Texturally, you know, the paint will fill in some of the gaps, so it's going to make it look smoother than it should. And I feel like less is better when it comes to those little grooves like you see there for the iris, especially since, again, they have a cut in for the eye versus having it smooth and round. And since we have the white out, we're also going to get these teeth here. Just get it all done at once. And I am using just a solid white, not a linen white or anything. And now this is where I'm going to mix up that gilded yellow and that fireball orange, and we're going to put some new highlights on certain areas here. I'm not going to go and do it on every single block of orange, but these little spikes here, I'm going to make sure they get a little bit of attention. And again, like I said, around the rim of the white of the eye stalks, we're going to use that to touch up and highlight it. And again, I forget my hand is right in front of the camera. As you can see, it's not super bright, but it is just enough pop to give it a little bit more of that yellow tinge like you see in the original figures. All right. Here he is. He's got a lot of work done. We've got the purpling going on. I've got that red filling in on the eye for that iris. Now I did have to pull a little bit of color out of that because I did fill it just a little bit too much. So we're going to go back in and we're going to get the rest of the pupils on these tiny little white eyeballs. Again, you try to make them centered. You try to make them a circle. If they're not, well, hopefully they're small enough so nobody notices. And just like for the ones that are firmly attached, we're going to get our detachable ones, and we're going to get some more irises on those too. All right, now on the original figure, he has bloodshot eyes. He's got that veining going on. Now I wanted to get my detail brush, and unfortunately there was one long hair that didn't want to come out of the bristle, so I had to cut it down. And we're going to get just the slightest amount of red. I'm trying to show you how small that brush tip is for me there. It's not one of my smaller ones, but it's just enough that I can make it, you know, an emphasis on that larger eye. And we're just going to do a little dab, and we're going to do it almost like you're painting a lightning bolt. It doesn't have to be too complex, you know, just a real small fork that you get going in the corner of the eye, and it'll do just fine. If you want, you can get an even smaller brush and do a whole bunch of lattice going around, you know, making sure it's a bit more of a crescent shape with all of them versus just a few. But I don't mind that cartoony feeling of just 2 or 3 veins popping on the side of an eyeball. I think that's kind of befitting of the paint job we're doing for this guy. Now for his pupil, I'm using adamantium black. This is one of my favorite colors. Hopefully, I didn't look to see if they still sell it. I really hope they do. But it is black with just a bit of shimmer in it. And I think that adds so much more to the color, you know, versus having a flat black or something like that. It's one of my favorites to use when I'm doing armor detailing or things like that. Or if, you know, you get an adventurer with a special, you know, steel or black iron sword. It just adds a bit of glimmer, and it just really makes it pop. So that's what we're going to be using for the pupil on our beholder here. And we're going to do all the little pupils as well on those eye stalks. Just a little dab. If you try, at least I found, if you try to actually paint a circle, it doesn't look like a circle. You just kind of have to do the stab. As much as I hate doing it to brushes because it's really not good for him just for that little bit, but whatever makes it work, right? And then don't forget your little tiny detachable eye stalks. Boop. Now, this is the variant that I told you about before that I kind of gave you a little peek at, and I did just a wash on him and then did gloss over top, and I think that's what I'm going to do for my beholder here. I do have the quick dip, and I love it, but it brings out a ton of dark tones because I only have the strong. I don't have the soft one. It's been out of stock at our local shop, so I'm going to mix up a wash. We're going to have some browns and blacks, and that's going to be our shading element instead of using a quick dip or anything like that. So I have golden brown, I've got the ruddy brown or umber brown, I'm not sure. Got the flat noir black, just a little bit of it. And then one that I want to experiment with, I love the Citadel Gold for a lot of my pop kind of stuff. So I want to see if it adds a shimmer to my beholder here. I want to see how much that actually comes through in a wash or if it just kind of is non-existent. I always appreciate doing at least a little bit of experimentation with your paints. You know, if it's just for you, then you're the only one that matters with how it comes out as. So if you're just trying to see what works and what doesn't, that's just fine. And I think you should experiment with one new thing every time. Otherwise, you're really not going to develop as a painter. If you try and do the same thing every time, you're always going to get the same results, and you're not going to figure out, you know, maybe little tips and tricks for yourself that work out or color combos you might like. So we're going to do the wash here on all of our orange bits. So we're going to start with those little eye stalks first, just because they are a bit of a pain. And then we're going to move on to our main figure. And having those pieces here, it's great because it's so much easier to hold that translucent piece. I wish I would have grabbed like some soft pliers or something just to be able to hold the smaller eye stalks. because I had to go back and redo a little bit of the coating on those just because my gloves did take off some of it because there wasn't anywhere else to hold on to. Now, for the main body of our beholder, I try to hit all of the armor platelets, and I will hit the mouth and the teeth. Now, personally, I don't like to do the eyes. I might do just a little bit in the corners, but nothing overbearing. And that's just because if you look at a lot of them, you got the eyes popping on them, especially because they're able to, I don't know, shoot lasers and spells from their eyes. So I think that while, yes, his teeth are going to have some fading and some coloration on them, I feel like the eye should be absolutely white because if you think about it, if you're walking into a lair of a beholder, what's the very first thing you're going to see? It's this giant eyeball just silently staring at you from the darkness. And I think that adds to the terror level a lot. So for this figure, I am not going to do a wash on the eye. You absolutely can if you want. I thought the purple rimming around it was just enough to kind of add a little bit more pop and enough shading that it was fine. Of course, give it a couple shakes if you see it's pulling anywhere. Another one of your good friends for this is going to be Q-tips. If you have any Q-tips on hand, if you see it pulling, of course, there's some spots where it should pull and give a lot more texture and depth to it. See here, this is where I said I got a little bit of that red on there. And that was just fine because that's just a little bit of blood on his teeth. Why wouldn't they be there? Anyway, back to the Q-tips. You just dab just enough off. It's not going to soak up everything, but a little bit. And if you feel like you need to reapply, you can go back in with a lighter hand and add a little bit more shading and you're just fine. Now, what I will say, if you are using a wash or a quick dip on this figure, make sure that it doesn't all sit in the slots at the top for his eyeballs. You're going to, of course, get a little bit in there, but you're going to want to clean it up to make sure that the eye stalks can still fit back into those and you're not left having to try and cut out some tacky later on. See, there's that Q-tip I was telling you about. Now we're just going to let this wash sit for a bit, make sure it dries, and we'll come back in for our next part. Now, the eye stalks. This is the part where I said, I'm not sure if there was a specific color that I really should have gone for with each of these. So that panel I just held up, that gets slotted in front of his eyeball. I'm sorry, his main eyeball. I know he's got quite a few. So I'm going to use the blue flame and make it semi-translucent. So it's almost like a cataracted eye is kind of how it's going to appear. And then these other colors are what I'm looking at for using on the actual spell casting stalks. I'm going to end up doing like a blue lightning, and then the yellows for the flame, and then two of the more strict spell ones I'm going to be using the green and the purple for. Now, the only part I really hate about these translucent pieces, I mean, they're great. You get them with a lot of like the campfire kits, a lot of the spellcaster kits, figures, they'll have them with them. They're great in theory. However, they always, in my luck, show all of your brush strokes. Now, I don't know if they're easier to paint when you have an airbrush, But just going by that reasoning, I feel like if you use an airbrush, you're going to have such a solid coat that they're not even going to be translucent anymore. So it wouldn't really make sense for them to make them translucent anyway. So here's that blue lightning piece I was talking about. For the spell casting pieces, I think is just fine because they're smaller, they're a bit more tapered. By the point that you would see the brush strokes, it really doesn't matter because they're so skinny. That giant eye shield, yeah, that's not going to look too clean no matter what I did. If you have any tips, if any of you are a bit more experienced than me on how that could have ended up a little bit more leveled, a little bit more of an even coat, just drop them in the comments below. Now this is a moth green. I love this color. I love it for terrain, for accents, anything witchy, of course. Again, not sure if they make it anymore. Hopefully they do. So we've got all of our spells and things posted up there. I showed you the colors that we used for the flame and the other ones. And now we are going to do one more wash. So if you're looking at it, we don't have that base of that figure done yet. So what I do, at least for ones like this, because I want this kind of be like a cavernous floor, so not straight rock, but not straight dirt. I'm not sure if I'm going to want to actually glue on, physical terrain pieces like moss elements or grass elements or things like that. So we're going to use that wash that we had originally made for the beholder. We're going to put that on the base, and then we're going to use our grays and our blacks and a little bit of browns and to paint over that just to kind of give it a multi-textured and layered feeling. And here you can see these I just do on top of a cotton drop cloth. I just accept that it's going to get everywhere, and it just makes it easier than trying to hold it up and not having it run, or setting it on a pedestal or something like that. You just put it on top of a cloth. If you overpaint, it automatically soaks it up. These cotton shop cloths I got off of Amazon. You can get like a pack of 120 for I think like $15, which for hobbyists, I mean, they're great. I use them for this. I use them for cleaning. They function just about every which way in this household. Now, once we are done doing this, we of course want it to sit for a little bit. It doesn't need to dry 100% before you pick it up, but of course you want it to, since that base is primarily the place where you're going to hold it unless you're holding your beholder on the sides. Now, we are almost done. As you can see here, we did get a little bit of that gold shimmer in that wash from that Citadel paint, It's a little hard to see on the camera, but I ended up pretty happy with it. And then we're going to do our final gloss coat. Now, I don't always do a paint on gloss. I have found that this Mod Podge spray produces supremely good results. It's what I used on my variant. And so here we have him, our final boy with our classical paint, which personally I think is like the John Wayne Gacy of beholders. You know, he's going to tell your kids a bad joke and tell them to get in the van he has candy. I think it's much more terrifying than just a blue or purple sheen. So here you go. I can't wait to use him in game. I hope all of you had a good time and some of you get your own beholder painting in. I think he turned out stellar for a half-day paint. Can't complain too much about that. Take care, guys.